All right, the Moto G, brand new from Motorola, winter of 2013-2014. This is the new phone from Motorola. It is called the Moto G. It is a budget phone. It is a cheap phone from Motorola, retailing in the US at starting at $179 for an 8 gig and $199 for a 16 gig phone. And we're going to take a look at this phone, give it an honest review, compare it to some of the other market-leading phones out there like the iPhone 5S and the Nexus 5, which might not be fair, considering these are quite a bit more expensive than the Moto G, but it's good to compare the sort of top-of-the-line stuff with this budget-conscious phone to see how well it compares and what the differences between this phone and those other guys are, so stay tuned. So first off, we're just going to talk a little bit about the box, what's inside, what you get, and the idea behind the Motorola Moto G. This is the US version, so this is a 16 gigabyte, has US US cellular radios in it for use on T-Mobile and AT&T. It's unlocked. You can use it on any GSM carrier. There's a SIM slot in the back of the phone when you take the back plastic off, and that will allow you to use it on any GSM network. It's unlocked, so basically around the world, but you'll be losing a couple of international radios when you get the US variant. So just be aware, if you plan on traveling overseas, the international unlocked phone will work in the US, but if you use T-Mobile, you might run into some issues with network coverage in every location. Again, box, very simple, very plain, no mention of specs on the box. Basically it just talks about a little bit about specs in the back, Corning Gorilla Glass, you know, not a whole lot going on there. Inside there was the phone, and the only thing they had was a USB plug, which is sort of interesting because they don't give you a charger. So that's new. I haven't seen that yet, where all you get is a USB plug. I guess maybe they just decided to leave it out to save some money. Most people probably plug it into a computer or to some pre-existing USB charger. I don't know why they didn't give us one, but anyway, we'll get the box out of the way. Jumping right into the hardware, well, first of all, you can see, despite the fact that this is a cheap phone, it still powers on relatively quickly. Swipe to unlock is nice and fast. There's no delay, no lag. How the phone feels in our hand, very, very solid. It is a plastic construction phone. It is similar to the Moto X, but it does not have the sort of customization that the Moto X has. You can't change the color of the buttons in the ring. This is a black and silver design here. You can get accessories for this phone that can take this black plastic cover off and actually give you a different color, so you can customize it a little bit, but not as extensively as you can with the Moto X. But we'll take this off. You'll see the tiny little SIM slot right here. You'll see a non-removable, non-user replaceable battery. Part of me probably thinks that if you do have issues with the battery, you're probably going to be able to replace this somehow if you go on iFixit, or there'll be guides to figure out how to replace that probably in the future. Pretty basic design though. You know, even though it's a plastic back phone, if you were to compare this to say like a Galaxy S4 or any of the Samsung phones, you definitely feel like this is a higher quality product. The Samsung phones feel cheap. They feel thin, they feel creaky. This has some weight to it, this has some substance to it. If I compare this to the 5S is lighter. It's also a little bit smaller. But this phone has a little bit of heft to it, and I don't know if that's good or bad. You'd have to pick it up and actually feel it to be able to tell whether or not you like the weight of it. I actually think it's almost a little bit heavy. It's certainly heavier than this Nexus 5, and the Nexus 5 is substantially bigger than the Moto G, but it's, yeah, I don't know, the heft goes, I go both ways with it. I think that part of me likes the way it feels in my hand. It's got a little bit of a premium feel to it, even though it's cheap. It has this recessed M, which if you see my Moto X review, you know that it's sort of cool to have this little dent here, this little dimple. Gives you a place to put your index finger when you hold the phone. It's sort of reassuring to have that dot there. You can kind of grab onto that every time, and for me anyway, I use my phone on my left hand, and it's easy to sort of grab that and something to remind my hand that it's in the right place. And so when I pick up this phone, you know, I have a really good impression of it. I feel like even though it's plastic and, you know, the design isn't as nice as like an iPhone 5S, you know, there's no metal, there's no premium features or textures, or there's nothing special about it. It still feels good. And it actually surprisingly reminds me of the older iPhones, like the 3GS that I have here. It's sort of a rounder shape. You know, they both are round plastic backs. They both fit comfortably in your hand, and they both have some heft to them. And I think Apple did a good job with the design in 3GS. I think a lot of people liked this build, and the Moto G definitely has some elements of that design in it. And overall, it's a nice phone to hold on to. I think it's a good size. I think it's a 4.3-inch display. Again, I don't know if that 4.3-inch display is going to be too small for people, too big for people. A lot of people in the Android community have bigger phones, like this Nexus 5 is a 5-inch display. The iPhone 4, or excuse me, from the 5 on is a 4-inch display. But iOS uses the screen size a little bit differently than the Nexus, or excuse me, than Android does. And part of me feels like this 4.3-inch display is a little bit cramped. I feel a little bit claustrophobic using Android on such a small screen. I think I actually prefer a 5-inch or just shy of 5-inch, maybe 7-inch display. So this feels a little bit small to me, this 4.3, but in general, it's good. In general, I think the screen size is nice. It works well for this phone. I don't think it's too small. I think it's probably pretty good for a lot of people. I think that, Apple has done a lot of research. They know that smaller size sells really well. They know that people like smaller size screens. And so the 4.3-inch screen on the Moto G actually works for me, and I think it's pretty good. And when I say good, I mean that I can reach everything with my thumb. It's small enough that I can reach stuff. I don't have to struggle too hard to reach all aspects of the phone, whereas on the Nexus 5, even though it's a nice, big, bright, huge display, it's hard for me to sort of twist my thumbs around and reach everything on the screen. It's a little bit more challenging to get everywhere with one finger. I have to sort of shuffle the phone up or shuffle the phone down or use two hands. Let's talk about what I like about the phone, and then we'll jump into some of the bad stuff about the phone. The first thing that I'll say that I like, other than the sort of design and the body and the shape and the size and the feel, is the software. This is running Android 4.3. They've guaranteed that it will be updated to 4.4 and beyond. I'm not sure exactly how far beyond, but there are guaranteed updates from Google. The screen is very bright, is very crisp, is very, very, very well done. It is colorful, it is saturated, it is probably calibrated pretty well. It does have a hint of pink in it, and we'll show you that here in a second. I'll bring in the Nexus 5. And you can look at these two screens. I don't know if you'll be able to see that on your displays, but this definitely has a pinkish purplish hue to it. This is a lot more accurately calibrated. So that little bit of pink sort of annoys me on the Moto G, but besides that, the screen is sharp, it's crisp, you can't see pixels. I mean, it's very high resolution. It's an awesome, awesome display. Moving into the software, Android 4.3, it's very, very much like stock Android. Motorola has a very light skin on top of this. It's definitely lighter than, say, your Sense with HTC or with TouchWiz on the Samsung series. It's not in your face, it gets out of the way, it's in the background. You have some of the neat features like Motorola Assist, which we've seen on the Moto X, and you have some other features built into the new Google operating system, but they're not part of necessarily a huge laggy overlay like TouchWiz is. It's very, very clean. It's very fast. Applications run smoothly. Applications load quickly. There's very, very little lag, if any lag, in this phone, which is pretty amazing considering that it's a cheap phone with a low-speed processor. And if you're a Samsung fanboy, you'll say, "Oh, well, this phone doesn't have a quad core and 2 gigs of RAM, so it must not be that good." Well, like I've said many, many times in my videos, specs don't mean jack. It doesn't matter what specs are in this phone. It matters about the user experience. And this phone offers a great user experience, and I love it. I love the fact that it's cheap, I can pick it up, it's fast, it doesn't give me any any hassle, any lag, no crashes, no bugs, no slowdowns like TouchWiz has. I mean, the Galaxy S4, if I had an S4 here, I'd show you how laggy the S4 is compared to this phone. I mean, this phone blows it out of the water, and it's so much cheaper than the S4. So, software-wise, I think the phone's great. I have no complaints about the version. I have no complaints about any issues with what runs and what can run. I think Google and Motorola did a really good job with the coding or whatever they've done in the software to make this lower-end hardware work so well and so smooth with this phone. Another part of this phone that I really like is the battery. All of my phones get me about a day's worth of use out of a single battery charge, and this is no exception. I think that I might actually get a little bit longer use out of this. Maybe unplug it at about 7 in the morning, and by about 8 o'clock at night or so, it's got to be plugged back in again. And that's average use for a business, adult person. Texting, emails, web traffic, 3G and Wi-Fi. Not a lot of gameplay, not a lot of videos and that sort of thing. 3G, Wi-Fi, cellular, all the radios in this phone are strong. No issues with performance as far as wireless or cellular or voice quality. Overall, nothing out of the ordinary. Good sound quality, good internet performance, good wireless performance, great, you know, as far as reception goes, no issues, no problems, no complaints in that department at all. One of the only other complaints I have about this phone is probably the camera. I think the camera is really pretty slow. It's laggy. The quality isn't that good. It's maybe fine for outdoor pictures. We'll just do a little sample here. It's just slow. You know, you look at that, you compare that to an iPhone 5S, and just the iPhone 5S is just a lot faster. If we look at the quality of the image, it's just, I don't know, it's just remnant of an older generation of smartphone. And, you know, they have to cut corners somewhere in order to make this phone cheap. And the camera is definitely one of the reasons, or one of the things that they've sort of used lower end specs and lower end components with. It's a good camera. It's probably okay for average use. If you're into photography or into mobile photography, it's not going to really cut it when you look at this phone compared to the iPhone 5S or the Nexus 5. Will it take a picture? Sure. Will it take a video? Sure. Is it going to look okay? Maybe. But again, if you're into mobile photography, you might want to think elsewhere about this phone. One of the other things I don't really understand why they decided to exclude from this phone in the software department is the Google Now voice integration. See, Google just actually heard me say that, and so it picked it up. But the Moto G doesn't have that feature, and I don't know why. I mean, you can go here and still click on it and still talk to Google and say, okay, Google, you know, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't actually pick up on my voice like the Google Now integration does in the Nexus 5 and also the Moto X. So just as an example with speed here, let's just launch, you know, some apps and just see how fast they launch on both. You know, both these guys are connected to Wi-Fi, so they're on the same network, and so. But we're going to launch some apps here just to see kind of how things go and the speed between the two of them. So like here's, you know, Facebook for example. Again, Nexus 5 faster than the Moto G. But again, it's a lot faster hardware inside there. Let's load something else here. Let's go to, let's load up Instagram. Moto G was faster on that one. Let's load up another one. Oops. Let's load Google Plus. Moto G faster on that one. So you can see, I mean, obviously this is not a scientific test, but the Moto G can hold its own, especially against these faster phones. And so, you know, when you think about what you're paying for this phone, $179 or $199 unlocked off contract, that's an amazing deal. That is really, really where this phone shines. And the fact that you can get it direct from the manufacturer for that price is astounding. I mean, this is going to be the new trend in mobile technology, and I love it. I love the fact that there's a sort of a quote-unquote race to the bottom. Now, you know, you have all these manufacturers like Apple with their iPhone making a premium product for $650 minimum off contract. And you have this Motorola that's sort of flipping that on its head. And so you're going to be able to buy a phone for $179 that can easily compete with the iPhone in terms of its general functions, you know, camera, internet, email, text, voice, etc. You know, granted, it's going to you have a little bit of sacrifice with quality in certain aspects, but in general, it does the same thing as this phone does, and it does it for a lot less money. And that's really great. I really, really, really applaud Motorola for doing this. And if you've seen my Motorola X review, I sort of am a little bit critical of it because I think it's way overpriced for what you get. I don't think the Motorola X, you know, the Motorola X lacks a lot of these features, a lot of these sort of premium features, but they still charge you $550 for it. So I just, you know, just don't really like that about the Motorola X. But the Moto G takes that another step down, down that ladder towards the bottom. But you're still getting a really, really nice phone. You're still getting a really, really solid feeling, really well designed, really sort of thought out phone here for not a lot of money. And I think that's great. And I hope it does well. And I hope that other people in the Android community follow suit, because it'd be nice to be able to get rid of these carrier subsidies, you know, and be able to buy your phones on your own and make it affordable for everybody. And so everybody can have a smartphone. And so the people who necessarily can't afford one can start to afford them when they cost a lot less money. So who is this phone for, and what are my final thoughts on that? Well, I think that you have to think about it this way. With this phone, you're getting a nearly top of the line, and I really would go out on a limb and say that this is, when you compare the user experience, right? When you compare this phone to this phone, or when you compare this phone to another phone, you know, you're getting a fast device with current software, with a nice display, and so you're getting a near top of the line device for a lot less money off contract. And so for people that want to travel the world, or for people that like to switch carriers, or for people that are accident prone and lose their phone or break their phone, or have a tendency to sort of want to switch devices or whatever, $179 for an excellent smartphone unlocked is astounding. It is something that's never been done before, and it is something that Motorola and Google have really done well, in my opinion. Am I going to carry this phone as my daily phone every day? Probably not, but part of that is because I prefer the Nexus 5. I prefer that the camera in here is better, especially with the 4.1 update. I like the color accuracy of the Nexus 5 screen a little bit better. I don't like the fact that the Nexus 5 screen is this big. I actually prefer a little bit smaller than that. But for me, the Nexus 5 is nearly close to the perfect Android phone. It's still, in my opinion, there's still no perfect Android phone. They're getting closer every time. But for me, it would be something similar to this Moto G, but with the guts and the camera of the Nexus 5 sort of inside, but with this sort of size phone. I actually prefer this size and this feel a little bit better. So getting this guy out of the way. In closing, I'd say if you have anybody that is on your list for the holidays, or someone who's in the market for a new phone, and $180 is not too much money for you, this is the way to go. They'll be pleasantly surprised. They'll really enjoy it. I think you will enjoy it. I think anybody you know who appreciates Android, or even people on iOS that want to try Android, it's a great way to do it. Check it out, Moto G. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe.